Okay, so today I'm going to demonstrate how to create UML class diagram in Visio. So first of all, let me show you the application I'm going to create the class diagram for. So it's basically a very simple Java application I have in here. So if I run it, I can show what does it do. So basically, I run the application. It shows me the current student records, and I hard-coded. Only have 2 students here. And each student has an ID and a name, and so the app asks the users to specify the student ID to be updated. Let's say 1. So the name used to be John. I want to update it to a new name, Sam. And then it shows that student ID 1 is updated in the database, and the new name is Sam. So for this application, I have 4 major classes and 1 just validated. We're not going to create that in the class diagram because it simply validates the input data type. So I want to create a class diagram sort of like this, has 4 classes. And let's get started. In the Windows, I have a Windows 10 here and Visio 2010. So if you don't see this UML model diagram, you can click into Software and Database and go find UML model diagram, usually this under. So you can see that a lot of elements already here. I see class, and I'm going to use class, and relationship. We have the association. Here we also have an interface class. So let's create our first class. Let's make it bigger. You can also change the font size by up in here. So let's give it a name, student, and for the attributes, click on the attribute on the left side, and I have ID, which is a integer, and the visibility by default. I talked about that in class, that we want the attributes to be all private. And then I have another one that's name, and this is a string. So I choose the string type. And for the operations, I just have the constructor student. I don't have any return. I have setters and getters for the name. Setter doesn't have any return value, but my getter, I do need to return the name, which is a string. And I also have setter and getter for the ID. And the ID, get ID, I return an integer. I can also change the order by dragging it. You can see a kind of a thin line, change the order of the operation, how they show up in my class diagram like that. So I am done with my student class. So when I click OK, you can see that all the operations, including constructor, has a nice pair of parentheses behind the name of the operations, and for the return type we can see those as well after the columns, and we see the visibility, plus sign for the public, minus for privacies. And the next I like to create for is an interface of the student DAO. So let's click into it and change student DAO. I just want to specify the name of the methods operations in here. So let's see. So for the operations in here, we have some input or parameters we need to set. So for the delete students, I like to set the parameters. How do I do that? So with this highlighted, I go to my properties. Apologize for my screen. Maybe this is a VMware issue that I don't see the description of these buttons, but remember this one is for the property. So I click on the property for delete students operation and go into parameters. So for the parameter in here, I have actually an object as my parameter. So I would say I have my student parameter and the type is the student type. So if I already create a student class, this will make it easier because as you can see, it shows in here as a type I can select. So you do have to create the kind of concrete fundamental class first. Therefore, you can create any other class that uses this class as one of its attribute types. So that's the only parameter for the delete students, for example. And the return type is student. And afterwards, we have get all students. And the return type is actually a list of the student objects. So it doesn't really have a read list in here. So I will just use I'll use the object in here. So next one I have, so the get student by ID, I do have input parameter for the get student method. So I click on, again, the properties and go to the parameters and I specify I'm going to need the integer ID and the type is the integer. So in this case, I'm returning also a type of student. I'm going to return a student object because I'm getting that student by ID. And the next one is update student list. And I do have a input parameter, which is a student object, again, just like the delete student. So I'm going to click on the properties again, parameter, and I'm going to put students here. And in the type, I'm going to select the pretty much the first one. There you go. So, and I don't have any return type, so leave it none. And once I'm done with all this, and you can notice that again, visibility by default is all public, and that's my interface class. And interface class, the nice thing about UML in Visio, they automatically make it, that's the convention for interface class. The next one, I'm going to create a class for the actually implemented Student Dao. So I'm going to call this class a Student Dao. Okay, so in here I have one attribute which is called the students, but again they don't have a list type, array list type, so I'm just gonna be calling it object. And if you want, you can also put a kind of the symbol to indicate that this is a array list. And then the next, we're gonna have some operations, and the operation, for example, is delete student by ID. So I do have an input parameter. Again, click on the property parameter. By now, you should be really familiar with that, and I need to know that student. So it's a student type. Pretty sure this is the student type. And that's the only input parameter. And do I return anything? No. It's the delete function. So I get all students, and I'm returning a array list. So I'm going to put in an object in here and get student. So basically, it's very similar. I'm going to return, and I'm going to return a student, and I'm going to have also input an ID. So get student in ID. So parameter will be ID, and it's the student type. Okay. I don't think I need this, so maybe I can do maybe I can do none first. Okay, there's no return, so we put none in here, and then we need one so for the get student, we click on the properties to set the parameter, and we have ID, which is an integer. And we're going to return a student object, so get student by ID, and then update student list, and I have a student as an input parameter, so student, and the type is student, so I know which student to be updated. And I don't have any return, right? So I have get student will return student, and get that will return array list. Therefore, I'm ready. So this is my Student Dao implementation. So last one is the interface class. We call that the same as the package name. And I don't have attributes. I have a main method. So in here I have print all students, and I have a Student Dao as my parameter. So I call it the SD, short for Student Dao, and I'm going to, because I already created Student Dao class, so that they will show in here Student Dao. Okay, and that's that. Basically, I need it for pretty much all my methods or operations in here. So I'll do the same thing. Would be Student Dao SD. And Student Dao. And the last one is display student, the updated student. So I do the same with the SD, and the type will be Student Dao. And in this case, I have one more. I want to know the ID of that student, so, and that is integer. And I'm done. Okay, so this is what it is. And lastly, I'm ready to put the association in between the classes. So I'm just gonna link here. Students will be used by Student Dao. Student Dao will be used by Student Dao implementation. You can move it around to align it better. And last one between the UI and interface. You can also highlight by drag and select multiple of them and move it all together. And there we have the class diagram created in Visio 2010.